Hello, welcome to this Belbin webinar. Vicky and I have been sitting in the background watching all your comments, and we couldn't not go live. We had to come and see you because we wanted to join in. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll be starting in about 10 seconds or so. If you are watching the recording, thank you for taking the time to do so. We hope that you find this useful. Obviously, we won't be able to answer your questions, but hopefully somebody who is here live will be asking the same ones that you want the answers to. So wonderful to see everybody. Okay. We're just looking actually, weren't we, of all the places where people are joining us from. And it's from Somerset to Kenya, from Switzerland to America, Cambridge,
Amazing.
excellent. It is just phenomenal. Okay, so we have a problem at the moment that LinkedIn isn't working. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think it's because there's a gremlin on the system, but this is okay. We're going to keep talking, and I'm glad that everybody is here on the StreamYard platform. Okay, let's begin. My name is Jo Keeler, and I am the Managing Director here at Belbin. We're based in Cambridge, and I am joined by Vicky, who is joining us also from Cambridge, but from an office. She works outside of here. So thank you so much for joining us, and we are going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about our recent survey results. Our survey results for our Belbin remote and hybrid working survey. We're really excited to be able to share this with you. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we do go any further. Yes, you are receiving a recording. And two, please do add your comments and questions in the chat, and we will try and get back to you. It may be that I interrupt Vicky mid-flow with an important question, or we keep them to the end, but please do put them in there. For those of you who join our webinars on a regular basis, you're going to be delighted that today you're not going to hear my voice. I'm going to hand over completely to Victoria, who is going to be taking us through the survey and all of those wonderful results. So I'm going to be in the background. I'm going to be checking the comments, but otherwise, Vicky, it's over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's great to see so many people who are as excited about data as I am. Amazing. So yeah, as Jo said, I'm the head of R&D at Belbin. So my job is fairly varied. I work with external researchers who want to explore a variety of different topics related to team roles. And then we also have our own projects, of which this is one. So we studied remote teams originally back in 2020 during the first UK lockdown, and we wanted to revisit that work and sort of adapt our approach and our questions, because obviously it's such a quickly evolving landscape. It's also, I think, a very sort of emotive discourse at times, and we were having a discussion about this. I think if you look at discussions and discourse on LinkedIn, it's often a very sort of tribal thing. People can get very sort of entrenched with their views and want to sort of defend their position. And I think this is really where the data comes into its own, because actually what we find when we sort of look behind the scenes is that things are a lot more nuanced in reality. So I think this is sort of an opportunity for us to look at what's working and what isn't with remote and hybrid work, and also for the first time to have a look at this in relation to Belbin team roles, because there's a lot out there about hybrid as time goes on. But this, as far as I know, is the first opportunity to link that into team roles and sort of add that into the conversation. Okay, so to get started, as I said, we ran this survey initially in 2020. We were asking people who were purely remote at that time, because vast majority of people were. This time around, last year, we asked people from all different kind of areas, so remote, solely remote, hybrid, and people who were primarily working in the workplace. And we had sort of similar numbers. I think 136 on this one, 142 on our previous survey. As I work through, you'll see we're assuming in this webinar a little bit of understanding about team roles. I'll try to sort of summarize as I go along, but I won't go in depth about the characteristics of each role, because this is really to sort of give you an overview of these results. Okay, so the first thing we looked at was just to sort of find out about people who are completing our survey. We had around 55% of people responding were hybrid workers. And then we had the fewer, sort of 28% were only remote. And then we had just over 10% who were solely based in the office. So the people who were hybrid were then asked particular things about their experience of hybrid working. So you'll see that as we go along. Okay, so we asked people who are working hybrid, are you sort of mostly remote? And you can see the how that sort of broke down. So there were more people, almost 60% were mostly remote. And yeah, then you've got a slightly smaller number who were mostly office. That's just sort of worth bearing in mind as well as we go through. And then the third one in this sort of section, which statement best describes your attitude? So how happy are you with the balance that you have? And again, this is quite interesting when we come to look at particular sort of benefits and drawbacks of hybrid and remote and co-located, as we're calling it. So co-located meaning, usually meaning for people responding here, being in an office. So co-located, I know that there are other workspaces, but I think for the purposes of this survey, people were talking really about co-located, meaning I'm in an office with my colleagues most of the time. So we had about 60% who were happy with the balance, which is lovely. And then we had 1 in 4 sort of wanted a bit more remote, and then 1 in 10 wanting more time in the office. So it's interesting actually to know that we've reached that point where we've got 60% sort of happy with that balance. And as we go on, we'll talk a little bit more about how the organisation feeds into that and how that sort of works for individuals and teams. So before we do that, let's sort of drill down into sort of team role experiences. So we asked people about a number of different factors, and then what we did was to draw together the sort of positivity and negativity across a lot of those different factors. And what these are the results that we found overall. So the higher the bar, the more positive their experience of that kind of work. So I think probably what you can see straight away is that you've got lots of our shapers loving co-located working, and there, but to a lesser extent as well, coordinators. So we've got here 2 fairly sort of dominant roles. For those of you who've played Contribute, our game, you'll know that the shaper exercise is all about pulling people away from what they're doing, bringing the team together, focusing, saying, this is our goal. How are we going to achieve it? And it stands to reason that you'd be able to achieve that more easily when you've got people together in that physical space. For coordinators, the approach is a little different. You've still got that sort of dominance, but it's really about building consensus, making sure that people's voices are heard, and that you can sort of bring people together. We know we can do that using Zoom or whatever it may be, but it's perhaps not as natural. And I think it's important actually to pause here and say that when we as Belbin were asked about virtual teams maybe 10 years ago, what was generally happening was that it was multinationals who had people sort of geographically dispersed. They needed to bring them together to work on a project. And primarily we were talking to people and coaching people on cultural difference. Now, hybrid working is so widespread that we don't really have, the profile of an average hybrid team. It could be any kind of team doing anything. So I think that's sort of an important point to bring out, that you've got these two roles that are trying to sort of bring the team together, and I think it's sort of borne out here that that's their more that's their preferred way of working. On the other side of the equation, and I'm deliberately ignoring plant because I'm going to come back to plant because it's an interesting one. On the other side, you've got your implementers and your specialists, who are generally much more positive about remote work. Now, implementers, we had this as well in our sort of 2020 study. Implementers in 2020 were having a great time because they're very sort of productive, they're very efficient, they like to work to a plan, they have their plan, they're going to follow it in a very methodical way, they're concerned with their productivity and what they're achieving. So it stands to reason that if they're remote from the rest of the team, there's absolutely no distraction, they can crack on with that work. So that's great. And in 2020, I think that's what a lot of teams were doing. They were maintaining status quo. They were concerned with sort of survival in the short term, rather than worrying about, how do we innovate? How do we put new teams together? And then you've got specialists. Specialists are, they love the sort of deep dive. They're very motivated by learning. They want to go into real depth on a subject. So again, if they're not sort of being distracted by all these pesky conversations in the team, they're actually fairly important, then they're going to sort of perhaps feel more positive overall. So just to say that this is sort of across the survey was the general sort of positivity of responses. So you'll see some sort of differences as we pull out individual topics such as communication, things like that. Plant is a really interesting one, because plants, like specialists, tend to work on their own quite a lot. Plants are very creative, they're very free thinkers, they like to have a complex problem to solve, have a blank sheet of paper and figure out a really great solution to that problem. And you'll see as we go through that there are some things that plants find really tricky about remote work. And it's interesting that when we asked them specific things, actually they did sort of see the benefits of co-located. So that's one of those examples, I think, of kind of nuance. When I say nuance, it's not that people have picked a side. I think a lot of people can see the importance of different kinds of working. And if we can sort of tease that out and embrace it a bit more, I think we can have a much more useful dialogue about that. Okay, so the next sort of broad topic we asked about was to do with the organisation's attitude. So how do you feel your organisation feels about remote and hybrid work? Perhaps unsurprisingly, for our workers who were remote 100% of the time, their organisations tended to view remote and hybrid much more positively. The blue bar, the blue section there is a sort of neutrals, neither positive or negative, and the pink is that they tend to be more sort of having a more negative outlook. So perhaps not a great surprise. If your organisation views it more positively, more people are going to take that up. For remote and hybrid, it was a little bit more split. Again, that sort of follows. So there was still a lot of positivity, perhaps more sort of neutral approach. I'm just flicking through these quickly because I think these are sort of more what we'd expect, but we'll get on to the sort of bigger ramifications of that. And then for people who were solely in the office, there was much more negativity they felt within the organisation about remote and hybrid work. And I think this is important because it suggests that people aren't necessarily just able to choose whatever it is that they want, that there is an impact there from how the organisation sort of feels about it. I think the interesting point, though, is when we then looked at the impact that those organisational attitudes had. So we asked people, how effective are you in your role? And we're asking them for the sort of strength of agreement or disagreement. And the green bars there are, the organisations that were positive about it. People were actually more effective, or they felt they were more effective in their role, regardless of where they were working. And that's really key, because that suggests there's more going on here. And I talked at the beginning about this subject sort of being a bit of a hot button issue. And I think that's because it draws in so many different elements of how a team and an organisation is working. For example, trust. My organisation might view this positively because they trust me to do the work, because they know that I'm engaged enough to get on with the work regardless of where I am. Perhaps because they're focused on outcomes and not sort of micromanaging. So it's interesting. Obviously, we're asking people to judge their own effectiveness. As you know, we're not massive fans of solely self-perception, but certainly people's perception of their effectiveness was higher. And that, even if it's just their own perception, will feed into engagement if they think they're good at what they're doing and they're having the opportunity to work well. So that was the sort of the effectiveness in their role. We then asked them, when we studied these remote teams in 2020, what we found was that productivity was really high, but individual engagement suddenly dropped because people just weren't used to work. A lot of people weren't used to working this way. Obviously, there are a lot of virtual teams that predated COVID, but as a sort of widespread working pattern, it was new. So this is something that we've seen change over time. Whether it's sort of companies figuring out how to manage it better and putting strategies in place, individual engagement does seem to be higher. It's interesting that there's a bit of a peak there for people working remotely when they're being trusted to do so. And there are lots of things that could factor in there. But generally, that's something that we've seen change. So in 2020, the split between productivity and individual engagement. But we did this time uncover something completely different. So I didn't know if you wanted to jump in here, Jo, if you were happy with me to carry on.
No. There's a few interesting things in the comments as well. What I love here is that really, if the organisation is positive about different styles and places to work, then that means that the individuals are also more engaged and they're more effective. There seems to be a win-win here, and perhaps that should take some of the fear away from organisations who aren't embracing this diverse way of working. Perhaps they should realise that people are going to be more effective if they are more encouraging of that. And Tamsin has got a lovely point here as well. It's about there's less cognitive dissonance, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely.
And when you
The
have that
energy that we spend on sort of worrying about the perception of things. And I think we sort of touched on psychological safety. If something goes wrong and someone's working virtually, is the manager going to assume that I'm not doing my job? Or are they just going to realise that it can be the same in the office when something goes wrong, the internet goes off? So yes, I think not having to expend that energy means that you can be more engaged in what you're doing, certainly.
Concentrate at the job at hand rather than worried about the perception of you. Perfect. I'll go away again now, but if anybody does have any more comments, please do write them in.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, I was just saying 2020, this big split between productivity and individual engagement. What we found this time, individual engagement, we've made big inroads, but unfortunately, no matter how positive the organisation is, when we asked people how engaged they were with their team, we just saw this much higher bar for the workplace. So I think what we can see here is that there's a real place still for co-located working. It's not sort of going anywhere. So yeah, I think this was a big sort of trend that goes throughout the study. And it's something that we can't necessarily mitigate just by having a positive approach. We need a strategy in place to make sure that teams are cohesive and that they're working together. So thinking about how this might sort of work in practice. I guess there are two examples of sort of failures that we tend to hear about a lot. One is that we have a big collaborative piece of work, and we've got everybody on a Zoom call, and something that would perhaps take a couple of hours in person might take all day. And we know that humans aren't made to be on a Zoom call all day. People will land up, even the most engaged, struggling with that sort of situation. I think the other side of the coin is that we perhaps mandate people to be on certain days, or we leave it open. And we heard a lot about empty office syndrome. So people saying, I've come in to engage with my team and there's no one else here. Or we're all being brought in for the same day, but we're actually all doing our individual work. So there's not, we're not sort of feeling those benefits. So I think the solutions that we're sort of looking at in this broader context, or the questions rather to pose, are how do we make that more deliberate so that when teams are together, how do we do that on purpose so we've got the right people in the room, and we're making sure that we're using them to best advantage. And unsurprisingly, we think the answer might be having a team tool that you can use to say, these are these people's strengths. We're working on this part of the project. We're working on ideas, generating ideas. So we need these people in, or we want to sort of work together as a team as a whole. So let's share our strengths, find out what's in our network, and make it so that when we are together, we know where to sort of call on those strengths. So team engagement was one big area, and the other was organisational culture, which was more of a split, but again much higher than that individual effectiveness or individual engagement. Whenever you sort of bring in that broader context, people need to meet in person, in whatever sort of form that may take. And it looks like that's the thing that we need to get better at doing. It's sort of making that more deliberate. Okay. So the next thing that we did was to break that down a little bit further by team role, which is always an interesting one. So individual effectiveness, I think that the first thing to say is that we obviously had a great cohort of people who were just very effective across the board, which is lovely. But you can see as well, in terms of comparing the co-located and the remote, that people tended to rate that effectiveness higher when they were working remotely, perhaps because of the kind of work that they're doing. And I guess it's possible when we're together as a team, it might not feel so sort of productive for individuals, even if that sort of important collaborative work is being done, because it takes time. It takes time to build consensus and all that important stuff. Again, individual engagement. People felt that was sort of good in both contexts. I think again the plant result is quite interesting here. So our creative people were fairly sort of split between saying yes in both contexts and more when they were working remotely. And again, remember plants, although they do work a lot in isolation, they'll also be, we looked in some cases at combinations. We know that their plant RI, plant resource investigator, is quite a common combination. So you can be looking at people who times by working alone to generate ideas at the plant side, and then the resource investigator sort of bouncing ideas off other people. Okay. Again, I think you can see the contrast there when we move on to the team engagement, and suddenly those blue bars come shooting up. So yes, much more team engagement when we're together. And there's a few interesting exceptions there which I wanted to talk about. One big green bar you'll see is the monitor evaluator. Monitor evaluators are they're very sort of logical, very dispassionate. They keep a bit of a distance from the team because their role is to arrive at the right decision. So they're not going to get emotionally involved in that decision-making process, or with other members of the team, and pick sides. So what you've got is someone who sort of sits naturally back from the team. You've also got somebody who loves debate, and actually for them, a 2-hour Zoom where nothing particularly is decided, but you have a great discussion, they might feel really engaged with their team after that. It might not matter what the context is. So that's an interesting one. The other one is the resource investigator, which you notice is quite high in both contexts. Now, I sort of feel that resource investigators have been hybrid since before it was called hybrid. They're sort of hybrid by nature because they go outside the team. They're very outgoing and enthusiastic. They go out to find out what's happening. What's the market like? What are other people doing? And they bring that knowledge back to the team. So they already have this very sort of natural divide. And actually, their idea of team engagement might be, I represent my team to the outside world, and then I come back and I bring that back. So I'm sort of less surprised to see that they're sort of better able to engage with the team regardless of where they are, because I think they're more of a sort of naturally hybrid group.
I would just like to say, as a naturally high RI, that is the case. Yes, they always say where the RI is, and it's the fact that they're never in the office. So yes.
There you go. But then they do have this connection, don't they? Yeah,
they do.
But
absolutely.
working remotely for them might be, a call on a train or, a conference, rather than, I think probably working at home on their own would probably be their idea of a nightmare. But when they say hybrid, they could be anywhere.
Absolutely.
Okay. So then looking at culture, so that connection to organisational culture by team role. And you can see here are really solo workers, the plants and the specialists. Now, they might feel more effective when they're working on their own because they're able to do, in the plants case, that sort of creative ideas work, and in the specialist case, that deep dive research. But actually, they do still feel that they need that connection to other people, and that remember, when we combine plant with things like coordinator, for example, you've got the visionary. What is the overall objective? What are my ideas for? And I think that sort of comes through here, that they still need that, even though they're solo workers, they still want that connection to the organisation's culture, and they feel that more strongly when they're together with other people. And I was saying at the beginning about this kind of nuance, I think it's a more sort of helpful approach to understand, when is it good for people to do each of these kinds of work? How can we make it so that people are able to sort of work most effectively in each setting? Okay, so we went on to look at sort of individual factors. So we asked people specifically about different topics, one of which was communication. And obviously we know that there's sort of potential with remote and hybrid for difficulties with communication, whether it's sort of picking up on visual cues, body language, the tone of emails, sort of relying on that kind of technology rather than being able to read the room and read someone face to face. So we had an interesting sort of team role split here. Again, we've got the monitor evaluator sort of feeling that communication is fine wherever they are, and the shaper also. And I think it's really important to think at this point, what does effective communication mean to people depending on their team role strengths? Because I touched on this just before. For a monitor evaluator, that might be debate. It doesn't necessarily have to have an outcome. For a shaper, communication is effective if you've done what I've just asked you to do. And maybe it matters less whether I asked you to do it in an email or a face-to-face or whatever. So again, it's just worth considering, like I was just saying about what remote work means depending on your team role, that communication, we can kind of break that down and say, okay, you might feel that that's great communication, but actually other people in the team might have a different idea, might need something different. And there are contexts where we can do that remotely, and there are contexts where we might need to do that face to face.
Yeah, absolutely, Vicky. I really love this slide because I think communication, it's such a broad sweep, isn't it? Where in fact it means so many different things to different people and in different behaviours. The fact that team worker, he feels they're more communicative, is more, they're more effective when in the workplace. It's because that's more about listening for them, isn't it? It's less
Definitely,
about this, it's more about this, and perhaps they can feel it and pick up on that body language, and that empathy is going to be more effective face to face. But that's very much a team worker use of the,
yes,
how do they see
approach.
communication? It's really interesting how it differs depending on
Definitely.
those team roles.
Yeah.
Just say we've got lots of questions coming in, but I'm going to wait until the end for a lot of them because
Okay.
otherwise we're going to go all over with the slides.
No problem. Okay, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. The team worker, that's sort of building rapport within the team, and also the coordinator, making sure everyone's voice is heard, sort of ensuring that everyone's pulling together. It's obviously a lot easier to see in person. Okay, so the next kind of broad area that we looked at, let me just move us on to the next slide, was we asked people, are you in an established team? Are you in a brand new team, or are you new to an existing team? And again, cutting this with the idea of effective communication, we could begin to get an idea of whether this changes depending on how the team's made up. So again, looking at 2020, we had a lot of established teams that were able to move remote quite well. There weren't so many opportunities for misunderstandings because, oh, I know so-and-so, that might have been a bit of a curt email, but they were probably doing another call at the same time. And you don't have the benefit of that, obviously, with a new team. But actually, what we found, particularly for communication, it seemed to be fine in both contexts overall for new teams. A little bit more of a mixed bag for existing teams, and seemed to be manageable for established teams. But when we come on again to the team engagement, you can see the same sort of trends cropping up, that people feel more engaged with their team when they're able to meet together in person. And this is most marked for new teams. And I think we often sort of say to people, if you can meet at some point, obviously it's not always possible, depending on where people are. But that seems to be a really valuable thing. And also for people who are new, and we talk a lot, I think, about onboarding people into existing teams. They need to understand where they fit in that whole. It's quite difficult, I think, to come into a new team that's just online and to sort of find your feet.
I think this is what we found a lot, wasn't it, actually, during those first few sort of months of hybrid working during COVID, or sorry, remote working during COVID, is existing teams. You already know that you've got that social contract. You already know the other people, even though you're not physically in the same space. So it's easier for them to get just changing the environment of which they're interacting was a lot easier. And then new people would come on board, and there wasn't any time put aside to let people understand that sort of social contract, the way in which we do things, the way in which we interact, the fact that you always have to go here, here, and here. Time wasn't spent doing that because we were also heads down, weren't we? So I know that we got a lot of feedback in the office, and that's where we came in and helped a lot of teams, was when new people were joining existing teams. And back to your point you just said there, Vicky, is I remember the work we were doing before all of this sort of happened, and we were talking about virtual teams that, as you said, was mainly the sort of the multinational teams that were working on project basis. And we would always recommend that people met up at least once and as early as possible when they were starting to work. And it's incredible the difference that does make.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think not just to the team, but going on to the next slide, that connection to the organisational culture, especially for people who are coming into an existing team. Because I think, thinking about a new team, you've kind of got your own microcosm, haven't you? You've got your team culture, and then you've got how that fits within the broader organisation. But I think where it's most pronounced, looking at our data, was when people are coming in to an existing team, and especially if they are a culture add rather than a culture fit. You know, if you're going to throw a resource investigator into a team of monitor evaluators, you know, or a plant into a culture of implementers, that's very important for them to understand that they are entering a culture that might be quite different to the way that they operate. And I know we've done that in Joe, you've done that in presentations before, where you have people sort of stand around the room, and you can sort of see that. And I think for somebody who's new to an existing team and they're sort of standing on their own under a particular team or banner, it's really important to be able to negotiate those differences. And it's easier, I think, it's being reported that it's easier to do in person. Obviously, it looks like you have more slack when you're in a newly formed team, because you're all sort of on the same basis, so you sort of get to figure some things out as you go, even if you're working in a broader sort of organisational culture. So I think that's a little bit of maybe a sort of a vulnerability of hybrid working, or just something that we have to be aware of, that we need that particular attention to onboarding. Okay. So we asked people, as we did in 2020, more generally about the benefits and the drawbacks of remote, and obviously it wasn't hybrid then, but now we've added in, so it was just remote, now it's hybrid. But the similar kinds of things came up. This hasn't broadly changed since then, and it's interesting to notice that the benefits tended to be more sort of logistical things like commute time, work-life balance. There's also sort of, when you think about it, the more individually focused things, so the benefits to me as an individual, and the flexible schedule. And obviously, not all of these things are sort of team role related, but when we break down the ones that are a little bit more team role related, we found some interesting patterns as well. So we asked people to respond. They mentioned that fewer distractions is one of the real benefits of hybrid working or working remotely. And you can see there, I know there's the monitor evaluators we've spoken about, but you can see our 3 task roles pop up. So the completer finisher, so the detail focus, working through a document, making sure nothing's been missed or nothing's wrong, very meticulous. The implementer, as we've spoken about, efficient, wanting to follow that plan. And the shaper, I don't want distractions. I just want to crack on. I want to get to the goal. So you can begin to see those patterns sort of emerge. When we asked about the drawbacks of remote and hybrid, actually the maintaining boundaries between work and home, I think, has come up a little bit higher than it was in 2020, which is an interesting one. But again, not particularly a team role related issue. So breaking down the ones that we thought were sort of more team role related, this is lovely. Communication difficulties and misunderstandings. You can see there the social roles just suddenly appear like the task ones did before. So coordinator, building that consensus, resource investigator, all about communication, and the team worker, building that sort of internal rapport. So it's interesting, actually, when you break these down, you can see, you can begin to see where people's priorities are, and you can begin to see how you'd have a discussion. Your specialist might say, what communication difficulties? Because they're just not, they're not sort of approaching things from that point of view. So I think that's quite, it's valuable to just understand our approach when we're sort of looking to break down things that might go wrong, or to make things sort of work better, is to have in mind, where is that person coming from? Are they somebody who's just really focused on productivity, and therefore you've got to have a conversation about some of the other elements? Or are they sort of noticing other things like the communication? Okay, another one that was potentially flagged as a problem of hybrid working was being able to manage time effectively. I think this is possibly my favourite graph because for plants and specialists, it's sort of what is this time of which you speak? I don't really they don't really have a concept of that. Plants just lost in this world of wonderful ideas, and specialists have been reading this textbook since 6:30 in the morning. So that's sort of on the one side. And then you've got implementers where you think, well, why would implementers be down there? Well, they might feel they can manage their time effectively wherever they are. I'm going to be productive. It doesn't matter where I am. I know what I've got to do, and I'm going to get on and do it, and I'm going to show you my results at the end of the day. So I think this is a really nice one for sort of drawing out those team role differences.
Vicky, I think throughout all of the slides and all of the research you've shown so far, I think the importance is that we are all different. And you're talking it right at the very beginning about this argument of either or, right or wrong. There is so much nuance, not just based on the attitudes of the organisation, but so much so on the individuals as well. I love these last 3 slides you've shown because the specialist has just been oblivious to everything that's been going on. So it's really important that when we're managing teams that we understand and we appreciate those differences. I think that's what's really been shouting to me as you've been going through, and especially that area that I might be really efficient, but is the team being efficient and productive as well. And there's that real difference there, isn't there, that's coming through, is that the difference between individual and team.
Absolutely.
And I think to me that's something that just keeps screaming every time you come to one of the slides. We've got some great questions that I'm going to come to in literally 3 minutes because I know how many slides are left, but I just want to tell people, don't worry, we are coming to them. But
Absolutely.
I say part of the survey, so we asked for numbers, we are, tick boxes, etc. But we also asked people for their thoughts as well, didn't we? We asked people to let us know a little bit more, sort of open field questions, so to speak.
Definitely.
And what did that bring up?
Yeah, so I've sort of picked out where we had sort of multiple answers and trends. So people were talking about the benefits of hybrid for bringing certain demographics into or back into the workplace. So people who are differently abled, who might not be able to access particular workplaces, and people with caring responsibilities, commitments, and things like that. So that the importance of that kind of diversity came up a lot. We also had the idea that it's about competition, that because lots of companies are offering it, that if you want to attract and retain talent, that it's something that you have to offer, and therefore it's something that you have to get right, because you need to be offering it in the knowledge that you can help that person work effectively and enable the team to work effectively around them. Sorry, I'm aware that I'm going quite quickly, but there's so much to get through, and I know you've got lots of amazing comments as well. So trust came up a lot, and I think we touched on this at the beginning, that arguably, if you've got an employee that you can't trust to get on and they're not engaged, then arguably wherever you put them, it's not going to work out. Lots of people were saying, there was actually quite a split here. Some people were saying, how can we trust people to get on with things and not let doing the washing or whatever take over? And other people were saying, that if you actually invest that trust, then you reap the rewards. And we sort of saw those graphs at the beginning about the positive approach. Another one that came up a lot was this empty office syndrome. That was quite sad, actually. There were lots of comments saying, I really want to engage with my team, but I go in and there's no one there. And again, it's an issue, isn't it, of making sure, have we got the right people in the right place at the right time? How do we know that? Well, because we know their strengths. We know that if we call them into a meeting in the office, there's a reason everyone needs to be together, because it's this kind of work and it's playing to their strengths. It's going to make them engaged. So yeah, there were lots of people saying, I want to engage with my team, but I don't have the opportunity to do it. And another one which I thought was really interesting was that someone pointed out, or quite a few people actually pointed out, that this is all stuff that's being added into the manager's workload. So not just the kind of areas that we've talked about, but managing cover, managing leave allocation, all of the policies, data protection, all of these other issues around remote working that are just sort of piled on top of the manager's existing workload. And that it all sort of adds up essentially. And it's another reason that we think, I mean, managers are sort of uniquely positioned because they know their team. They hopefully know the strengths in their team, but they're also having to deal with, the rules that come from above, and they're being told, people need to come into the office a certain number of days a week. So they're trying to be that bridge, I think, between the organisation and the needs of individuals, and it's a lot.
Absolutely.
They
I
need
think
some help.
yeah, they do. And we see this time and time again when we're working with teams is the manager is the one who's getting it from above, they're getting it from below, they're trying to ensure that everybody's boxes are being ticked, but they're not particularly being given that much more time or resources to be able to help them do this in such a changing and complex environment, which they've suddenly found themselves in. And they get all the bad press as well. I feel quite sorry for managers. I feel that they're constantly being criticised, but we need to help them. We need to give them tools to be able to manage both up and down, don't we?
Absolutely.
Perhaps a tool like Belbin might be quite useful.
You never know.
You never know. So there's a couple more survey comments that came in that we thought we'd share.
Yeah, I thought this one just quite neatly sort of summed up that maybe the task versus social, that the work itself can be done quite well while the team relationships deteriorate. So I think that just sort of being able to address that to people depending on sort of where their team roles are. And also, bearing in mind, I mean, Belbin started, didn't it, as matching people to jobs. It was about matching the person to the work. And actually, starting that from a team vantage point is really important because you have to have those relationships. You can't. We know that a real team, a cohesive team, will outperform a load of high-performing individuals. So we can't just focus on the delegation. We need to have that through the lens of the team, which is what Belbin does. And then, do the right work in the right place at the right time with the right people. I love this because I thought it's absolutely that's the goal. And then the $1 million question is, how do you do that? Well, you know what kind of work you have and which people you need to do that because you know their strengths. And you know how they might sort of approach communication difficulties and things like that. So I just thought that was a really neat sort of summation. That's the ideal.
It is the ideal, but it's difficult. I think what we're seeing here, and also in the comments, that things are easier said than sometimes done. So
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
trying to find that link in, isn't it, with finding some language to understand that perhaps if the manager, or so it's been highlighted that there's a problem that needs solving, we need to get some different ideas. Is not bringing everybody into the office to do that, but bringing in those people who have strengths in those areas. So bringing in the resource investigators, and the plants to come in, but not expecting somebody to come into the office if they're perhaps a high implementer, because they're just going to get disengaged because they're not going to be able to contribute as much. I mean, we're simplifying. I appreciate that. We're all a wonderful mix of all of these team roles, but this is really the crux of what it is, isn't it? Getting the right people in at
Absolutely.
the right time. Absolutely.
Yes, and I
And
think
I
that's the
believe,
way to sort of, sorry, yeah, just going to say to decrease that frustration of being in meetings that you don't need to be in, or work that doesn't play to your strengths that you have to call on other people. So that is really where I think Belbin comes into its own.
yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay. Just to point out, actually, that this is a great quote, and it's so good because it's very similar to that of Dr. Meredith Belbin, who talks about making sure you've got the right people on the stage at the right time, because we don't all need to be there together all of the time as teams. We don't have to all be sort of co-located. We need people in and out at the right times. Vicky, wow. Thank you so much for presenting all of the research, and don't worry, for everybody, if you've been scribbling notes, you are going to be getting the recording as we finish. As I press the button, it will automatically be in your inbox. There's a really good discussion at the moment talking about culture, Vicky, that I'd like to come in. I've got to scroll all the way back up now. And just saying that culture is hugely important as a mediator of organisational values and as a non-formal coordinating mechanism for values, attitudes and behavioural routines. So in the context of working from home, the less coordination is required because the team roles also carry this. The happier working from home people should be. So what did you think about that? Just wondering whether or not
The
people
less
are...
coordination is required.
Yes. So therefore, are people happier if they're working from home? Because there's less coordination going on. I don't know. Walter, if you want to summarise, sorry, we've got some wonderful chat here. One of your questions or your observations into one, that would be wonderful. And then I can ask Vicky rather than me trying to get all those pieces in. And a lot of people saying again that, yes, it's really hard for managers. It's difficult for managers. How do we motivate different people, different approaches to be able to do that? And it is all about a careful balance when you're talking about culture, isn't it? It's you don't want to go too far one way or too far the other. So again, really, really important.
That's it. But I think if you're sort of starting that conversation from the point of view of understanding their team roles, you've got a head start. It might still not be an easy conversation, but at least you can have that in mind, you know, and if you're talking to someone who's quite high implementer, you might be saying, yeah, we don't, there's no problem with your productivity and we trust you to get on with the work, but we need to make sure that this plan that you're following is still relevant. We need these times to sort of check in and collaborate, because we don't want you doing all this wonderful work and it going to waste. So I think it just helps. I don't think it's a panacea, but I just think it helps frame the conversation maybe.
Absolutely. So really, the research was useful because what it's done is it said, look, don't worry, individually we are effective, we are efficient, we know what we're doing. Some of us, depending on our team roles, our different strengths, different things are annoying us more than others. Some things are more positive than others, depending on us. But actually, individually, we're okay. And we're okay kind of regardless of where we are. The key bit here is the fact that that doesn't just, it's not the case for teams. For team effectiveness, what we're seeing is we do need to be back together. We need to be co-located. But what we don't want to do is erode that trust and everything else that's been built up by just getting everybody in, regardless of what it is that needs to be done. So it really shows that we need to concentrate and look at the team. We need to look at team effectiveness, but we need to do this with careful thought. We need to make sure we're doing that, understanding what it is that we want the outcomes to be. And like people have said, it's the right people in the right place doing the right work at the right time. It's getting the right people on the stage for when they need to be there. So anything else you'd just like to say is just to sum up, Vicky? Well, what's been your key takeaway?
Yeah, I think it's to, just as you said, to keep the team in view. I think it's because of the way that the discourse goes, it's really easy to start focusing on individual needs. And whilst, as you say, you want to sort of embrace that from a point of view of well-being and work-life balance, that we need to be able to align that with team effectiveness, and that this gives us a positive framework to do that, because it kind of stops the us and them, and it's actually, we know you can be most effective if we can get this balance right. But it's really keeping that, it's starting with the team, it's having a tool that starts with the team.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vicky. And thank you so much, Walter, just come back in there. And it's critical what I'm saying. Yes, thank you. That makes sense. Is thinking about all of this in the context of trust as that key determinant for team effectiveness. I trust you to get on with your work as I share similar organizational values. And that's what we saw, wasn't it? That people, it was coming through in the research. There's that trust is so important. You've got that resonance, haven't you, between the organization and the individual. Thank you so much. Wow. Okay. I think that's 54 minutes has gone like that, Vicky. There's been so much.
I'm really glad
Thank you
it's not too
so
much graph
much.
overload.
Said it's fish. Actually, I'll just finish here because I think it's important that we practice what we preach at Belbin. So, Vicky, what are your top team roles?
They tend to move around in these three, but implementer, specialist, completer, finisher.
And where do you mainly work?
Mainly remote.
Me.
But
And
coming
my
in
top
when
team
needed.
roles, coming in when needed. Mine are resource investigation shaper coordinator. I love being in the office, and that's where I am today. But what we do figure out is when Vicky and I need to have meetings, I need to just sit down with Vicky, we need to go over a few things, is that Vicky's brilliant, she'll come in when needed, and then I'm trusted completely to get up, to get on with all this wonderful work when not actually here. So we do practice what we preach here at Belbin. We do allow that
We try.
flexibility. We try. Vicky, thank you so much for that. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank
That's
you.
been
Yeah,
absolutely
thanks so much for
fabulous.
joining us.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.